All right, so we're going to have this idea of feudalism. Feudalism is going to be a structure for society that allows people to know who's in charge and kind of what their role or responsibility is within society. And this idea of feudalism, it's going to be something that we see even in modern society today. Not to the same degree, but we can see the elements of feudalism in the way in which organizations are structured and even the way in which a school is structured. So let's take a look at feudalism. At the very center of feudalism, we have a king. And typically in feudal society, we have the king's manor. So that's just where he lives. Now, the king is going to be in charge of this large territory. So, as we look at this, this is a lot of land, essentially, for one person to control. And how do we figure out who is king? Because remember, we have a society in which there's no government, no sense of control whatsoever. And so we have somebody who essentially says, look, I'm king. How do they get to make that decision? Well, there's what's called the divine right of kings, which essentially means, think about that, divine right. If it's divine, then it came from God. So this is a right given to this particular individual by God. We're dealing with a group of people. The only thing that binds them together is their belief in God. So if this particular individual comes to you and says, you know what? I have something to share with you. Last night God told me I'm going to be king. I am the person who's supposed to be king. Well, God didn't tell you you were supposed to be king, but God told this individual that he was supposed to be king. Regardless of whether God actually told this person they were going to be king or not, doesn't really matter, because their belief in Christianity, their belief in God, means that they're not going to call this person a liar, because that would mean that they're going against God if they say, no, you're not supposed to be king. And so they're not going to go against God. So this person essentially can set themselves up as king at this point. And so the king is going to be either at the top or at the center of things. And the way in which this goes is you then have a king who says, all right, guys, this is way too much land for me to control by myself. I'm going to need some help. And so the king is going to give land to some other individuals. These individuals are called vassals. And the land that they're given is called a fief. And so this land, let's go ahead and break it out into quarters. So now the king is in charge of all of it. But he needs these vassals to control these smaller regions. So he's going to put them in charge of these smaller regions. These individuals are called barons. So now a baron is going to be in charge of all of this land. So a baron's going to say, you know what, guys, this is a lot of land for me to control by myself. I'm going to need some help. So let's go ahead and divide this territory into quarters. So the baron's going to be in charge of all of this land. Keep in mind, the king is in control of all of this land. But the baron is going to say, I need some help. So he's going to put someone in charge of this land. this is a lord. A lord is going to be in charge of this smaller portion. Now, a lord is going to have peasants that work for him. But a certain portion of this land is going to be reserved for a very important group of individuals in feudalistic society. And that is the church. The Roman Catholic Church, even though it's Roman Catholic, it's going to be something that is going to directly impact feudalism. A member of the church is not going to be equal to a king, but they're going to have almost as much power over the entire territory. Because one of the things that's going to happen is the church is going to get 10%. It's called a tithe. They're going to get 10% of the money that's going to be brought in within the kingdom. And so the church is going to play a major role in folks' everyday life. So when we look at this smaller area here that has been given to the Lord, we're going to divide this into thirds. So what we have here is a third is given to the peasants. A third is given to the church. And this other third is reserved for the Lord. This land here is reserved for the Lord. So this is going to be the land that the Lord's manor is going to sit on, is 1/3 of that land that he's been given by the baron. Now, the barons, they are also, and you'll notice this is kind of how the system works. The peasants pledge loyalty to the Lord. The Lord pledges loyalty to the baron. The baron pledges loyalty to the king. So if you wanted to look at it in more like a triangle, we have these 4 areas. You have the king up top, you have the peasants down below, you have the lords here, and you have the barons here. And the lords are also known as the knights. So we have essentially these armies that the baron can bring to the king when the kingdom itself is being attacked. And so this structure is going to give the king a lot of power. But typically, it is the barons who are going to truly control areas. Many times, the king is going to be nothing more than a figurehead in these societies. So this particular layout here, I hope gives you a better idea of what feudalism is and how each part here works together. So keep in mind, within each of these territories, we have the church, you have peasants, and you have the Lord's land. Now, when we look at feudalism like this, something to remember is that 90% of the population is going to be a peasant. And so we have a lot of peasants, we have fewer lords, fewer barons, and one king. Now I want you to think about how this can apply to school. Typically, you have a superintendent. We have a lot of students. We have fewer teachers. And then you have building administrators. So that'd be like your principals and such. So we can see how this structure, this pyramid structure of you have a lot to little, can be seen even in our lives today. So as I said, feudalism is really going to help to establish order. We saw that order in the triangle, in all the squares. So feudalism is going to help to establish order, and it's really going to happen directly after the fall of Rome. As I said before, in the year 476, Europe is going to be left with no central government. And there's going to be no system of defense because the Roman army is now focused all in the east, the Eastern Empire. So there's nothing protecting people in the west. So what we have some invading groups that are going to be set up really throughout Europe. And so because there's no system of defense, we have some invading groups that some of what are known as barbarians. They're going to be setting up their own kingdoms throughout the West. Now, the most powerful rulers are going to be those that are going to control the most land. And one of these groups specifically is going to be known as the Franks. Now, the Franks, and we'll get into this here in a minute, but the Franks are going to be the group that's later going to become the French.